This chapter is about sleep and the effect of stress on sleep, and just a little bit of the reverse. Um, how does not sleeping affect your stress levels? So, it sometimes, as you probably know, it can definitely be a vicious cycle. Anyway, let us take a look at our notes. And this is something that probably a lot of people don't think about, but apparently all animals will die if they don't sleep at least some. And so sleep definitely is a restorative time for brains and the rest of the body. There are some species that have different ways of sleeping, like actually one hemisphere at a time or micro sleeps. Some of the marine animals are like that, just so that like a part of them is always aware of what's going on. But we're going to be focusing on the human. And stages of sleep, first, I'm just going to go through these really quickly, and then I have an EEG of the sleep stages that I'll pull up for a moment. But most people are very familiar with these different sleep stages. I'm going to move through them pretty quickly, but let's look at some of the details. During stages 1 and 2, you basically have very shallow, you're easily awakened type of sleep. Stage 1 is marked by the presence of something called theta activity. And these waves are measured by hertz. And here is the hertz, 3.5 to about 7.5 hertz are indicative of theta waves. You have a very transitional stage at this point. In fact, sometimes you can see people's eyes rolling around. Babies, it's really easy to see when they're at this point, and just before they move into stage 2. Now, some of these time frames are going to be a little bit different depending on the individual, but generally speaking, stage 2 starts about 10 minutes after the onset of stage 1. And it is marked by some periods of theta activity, but now we see something called sleep spindles. So sleep spindles are indicative of moving into stage 2. These are short bursts of waves that are 12 to 14 hertz, and they occur about 2 to 5 times per minute. And the onset is indicative of stage 2, but you can find them all the way through stage 4. So 2, 3, and 4. One thing that scientists think it might happen during these sleep spindles is a decrease in the brain sensitivity to that sensory input. If you watch somebody sleeping as they fall asleep, little things will kind of awaken them. Small sounds even, or changes in lighting. But then it starts to get harder and harder, and the same sounds that might have disturbed somebody before now don't seem to awaken them or bother them at all. So sleep spindles may play a role in this transition to not being so attentive or noticing sensory input. Also, stage 2, we see K complexes. And these are sudden, very sharp waveforms, and these are found only in stage 2 sleep. So there's a differentiation between sleep spindles and K complexes. About 1 per minute. You can actually trigger K complexes by noise. If you use some kind of auditory stimulus, you can actually trigger a K complex. Okay, so these lighter sleep stages start transitioning into deep sleep or slow wave sleep. Stages 3 and 4 are both included in this slow wave sleep or deep sleep phase. Basically, during this time, we have a metabolically quiescent sleeping brain. Quiescent, that's a great word. Putnam Dictionary, please. Quiescent, quiet, very, very calm, very quiet, and in a way, sleeping. So now we have stage 3 that about 15 minutes later, trust me, I'm not going to ask you a question on an exam about, okay, how many minutes after the onset of stage 2 sleep do we start stage 3? No, because first off, there's too much variability. These are approximations, and I'm not interested in you worrying about those kinds of details. But what do we see in stage 3 sleep that we didn't see before? Delta activity. And that is shown by waves that are less than 3.5 hertz. And generally speaking, you're in this stage for about 20 to 50% of sleep. And where before we could see like more clear-cut differences between the stages, it is not so clear-cut as we move from stage 3 to stage 4. Stage 4 contains more than 50% delta activity, so that is what you're going to be looking at. It is your deepest sleep. Then comes the arrival of rapid eye movement or REM sleep. It's also called paradoxical sleep because even though this is transitioned after deep sleep, you have the presence of beta activity. Beta, that is like an alert state. And yet you are sleeping. So typically, rapid eye movement sleep starts about 90 minutes after the onset of starting to go to sleep. Just sleep 1, 2, 3, 4, REM about 90 minutes later. However, this again varies from individual to individual. And we've seen in some individuals who have clinical depression, they actually enter REM sleep a little bit earlier or much earlier than others. When we look at the waves during REM sleep, the EEG becomes desynchronized. You don't see this real nice synchronization. And you get a sprinkling of these waves that I'm talked about before, the theta waves mixed in, and you have beta. So you can see there's a lot of differences once we hit this stage. You see eye movements, even though eyelids are closed. If you watch, you can see the eyes are moving around inside. And this is really important. During this phase of sleep, you have a decrease in muscle tonus. In fact, if you've ever been in REM sleep and maybe had a dream, because a lot of your dreaming actually occurs in this, and wake up suddenly, sometimes you feel almost like you're paralyzed. And this is the engagement of motor neurons to keep your periphery from movement, a lot of intense movement. You are not going to, unless you have a sleep disorder, get up and run around the room or, drive to somebody's house and break in and commit a crime and get back. And I have no idea. It was during sleep. Not going to happen. So this decrease in muscle tonus is an indication of normal REM sleep. and it goes away. Your regular muscle tonus will return once you ease out of REM sleep again. Now, in your book and in other places, and not to argue with Sapolsky, of course, but very often you see it's like, okay, you're stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and then REM, and then back down through a 90-minute cycle. Let me just say that this does not always happen in this order. If any of you actually have like a Fitbit or some other device where you can track your sleep stages, you may notice this is not indicative of yours. You might have REM occur soon, or sometimes not until very late into the night. You may actually have deep sleep occur earlier than you would expect. So this is typically what is proposed to be the normal cycle. Stages 1 through 4 sometimes are referred to as non-REM sleep, and stages 3 and 4 are referred to as slow wave sleep. I have a link here that I don't want to bother bringing up because of all the lovely issues that I sometimes have. So here is an illustration of the EEGs representing each different stage of sleep. So let's just go through them and kind of remind ourselves of what's present in the different stages. Here, awake, low voltage, it's random, fast. You can see here, and it's not very, even, not real synchronized. Now we're moving into a drowsy stage, and you start getting these alpha waves, which are indicative of relaxation. And if you're really drowsy, this probably happens during class a lot. And probably more with these video lectures, I hope not. But now we're moving into a stage 1 sleep, and you can see the difference in the waves, the brain waves that start occurring, and you can see here the theta waves. Okay. Now moving down, and again, we're in non-REM sleep to stage 2. You're going to start seeing the appearance of sleep spindles, right? And K complexes. Let's scroll up a little bit. So what do these look like? Here, sleep spindles. Wow, take a look at this. Very obvious. After looking at these one time, I bet I could test you and go, okay, point out the K complex. Here it is. Look at that difference. And from this peak to this drop, K complex. And we are now in stage 2. Okay, now here's some delta sleep. You can see the difference. Look at these waves. Not nearly as fast. See the difference? But look at the amplitude. And as we move down to REM sleep, you can see now low voltage, okay? They're random. They're fast though. And you have the presence of something called sawtooth waves. And here's an example right here towards the end, and another example. So those are illustrations of the different types of brain waves that we'll see in the different stages. So I know we've talked about how metabolically demanding the brain can be. The brain needs glucose, and the amount of glucose that you can see uptake in the brain during certain imaging studies is indicative of how active certain brain regions are. So what is happening metabolically during these different stages? And I'm not going to worry about stage 1 and 2. I'm going to move right more to the slow wave sleep. Now, what's happening? Areas that are associated with arousal and muscle movement slow down. That should make perfect sense. Most of this should. Regions associated in the consolidation and retrieval of memories show little change. Now, remember some of those areas, the hippocampus being that primary brain structure where information is taken, long-term potentiation occurs, and then that promotes storage of these memories in your cortex, and then that can also come back the other way from the cortex back and be brought into memory, working memory, and so forth. Pathways that bring information to and from these particular regions do, though, shut down dramatically. It's almost like for a period of time, these regions that are specifically associated in the consolidation and retrieval of memories are being concentrated. They're working really hard and they're not taking in more work right now. And they're focusing on strengthening what has been occurring and getting those memories embedded and getting those pathways strengthened, but not the pathways that are bringing information to and out away from those regions. I hope that I'm differentiating that well enough for you. Parts of the brain that first respond to sensory information have some degree of shutdown. And more dramatic changes are in areas that integrate, associate, and give meaning to that information. So now we're starting to have those areas that would be integrating things appropriately slow way down. Sleep deprivation is apparently a good predictor of how much slow wave sleep will occur the next night in a typical person or animal. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But let's move on and see what's happening during REM or REM sleep. Now, if you remember how the waves looked, it should be very logical that overall metabolic activity is increasing during this period of sleep. Areas that regulate muscle movement, breathing, and heart rate increase their metabolic rate. Now, that doesn't mean you're necessarily having more muscle movement. Remember that there are neurons, motor neurons, that are responsible for inhibiting movement as well. So just to make sure that's not too confusing. Increase in activity in limbic areas. Limbic areas. Remember that limbic areas, the structures that are associated with your limbic area, have to do with emotions. They're emotional centers. So that activity is increasing during REM sleep. There also is a large increase in activity in the regions of the brain that integrate visual information. So those areas that, remember, you have a primary visual cortex in the back of the head, but then once you get up into these areas here, you have integration. You get upper level visual information coming together. The frontal cortex activity, though, goes way down, illogical. Most storybook dreams occur during REM sleep. And if you put together these different factors, what is increasing, which regions of your brain are increasing in activity, and which ones are slowing down, it kind of makes sense. Sometimes you get the dreams that are like, it's like they make no sense, like crazy, crazy things happen. If you can remember enough of them, once you wake, sometimes you can pull the pieces together and see how your brain has actually, connected things that weren't necessarily connected. And one theory is that dreaming may exercise brain pathways, or as Sapolsky says, use it or lose it. Also, if you deprive someone of night's sleep, you get more REM sleep the next night. Slow wave sleep, REM sleep, very, very important. So typically, and you'll notice I'm saying that a lot because trust me, this isn't always standard for every single person because we are all different. But typically, if you deprive someone of a night's sleep, you're going to get more REM sleep the next night. You're going to get some more deep sleep, and the lighter stages of sleep will be much shorter. And these dreams, it's interesting. There was a professor who was here for a long time, and he taught, Dr. Watt, and he taught a course called Religion and Dreams. And I took that course, and then he asked me to be a TA for that course. And it was very interesting. Part of what I had to do was go through the notebooks or written notes of students in the class and see what their dreams were. They were supposed to, when they woke up, try to write down right away what they were dreaming about. So that was one of my tasks. It was an interesting course to TA, let me tell you. And there were different things that came up in that course. For example, one person said that his roommate would get up sometimes in the middle of the night, run around the bedroom and tackle or knock over the chest of drawers. He was a football player. Clearly, his motor neurons weren't doing what they should have done because he was still very active peripherally. And actually hurt himself a few times. Another case, there was an individual who came up to me and decided he should tell me about some dreams he'd been having. And yeah, they were interesting. And so he was trying on, I'm like, oh, you know what, that's enough. I'm getting the idea. I can, make notes or whatever. Like I said, there were some interesting times during that course, particularly as a TA. Anyway, I digress. Sorry about that. Moving on. Both slow wave sleep and REM sleep seem to play roles in, one, the formation of new memories, getting them in, and consolidation of information from the previous day, and helping to bring together information that became less accessible over the course of the day. Just think about when you're going through a day, and you might even be in a class and you hear something, you learn something, and you're like, oh yeah, got that. And then you're talking to somebody about it and it seems, oh yeah, it's right there. Then later on, it's like, wait a minute, little less accessible. So slow wave and REM sleep both seem to be involved in trying to pull that information in and put it in a place, consolidate, get it somewhere so you can access it. So is memory consolidation what we've been talking about that is disrupted with sleep deprivation stressful in and of itself? Research has shown, and this is kind of interesting, that the pattern of memory disruption that's caused by sleep deprivation is actually different from the disruption of memory caused by stress. So this is different mechanism happening, different patterns that are being observed. There have been some correlates noted. Being exposed to a lot of new information during the day seems to be associated with more REM sleep that night. That kind of intuitively makes sense if everything that we've just gone through is true. The amount of certain subtypes of sleep at night predict how well new information is actually recalled the next day. So let's take a look at these different things. And this little area of notes is probably an area that you should pay attention to for way later, towards the end of the semester, hint, hint, covered in a written exam. If you get increased amounts of REM sleep during the night, you tend to have better consolidation of emotional information. Now, again, remember that the limbic system is really active during REM sleep. An increase in stage 2 sleep seems to be more associated with better consolidation of a motor task. If you put together and have more REM and slow wave sleep, you seem to have better retention of perceptual information, seems to be correlated with that. Okay. Bruce McNaughton was a scientist who really did a lot of work with sleep, and his participants, if you will, were rats. And the good thing about that is you can take a rat and you can implant an electrode in a neuron in their hippocampus. And that's something that most of us probably would not say, hey, you want to use my brain, go for it. Anyway, he recorded the activity of a single hippocampal neuron, not just one, but single hippocampal neurons in rats. And he identified ones that became particularly busy or active, I should probably say active, while the rat was learning some new explicit information. Explicit. This area of the room over here, if I go, I need to stay away from that because if I go over there, I'm going to get a shock. Use your imagination. There are a lot of different types of information. And that, or like maze, I mean, you know all about testing rats in mazes, all kinds of mazes. So as they learn during the day, those same neurons that were really active during the learning of those explicit tasks were the busiest or most active that night. But even more than that, the patterns that occurred during the learning were repeated during sleep. It has been found that during REM sleep, genes that help form new connections between neurons are actually activated. Wow, that makes a lot of sense. Just think about it. That's what's supposed to be happening, get this consolidation going. Genes are turning on, new connections, strengthening of connections, and wow, that is a good thing to be able to have. So yeah, I guess we kind of need that sleep. When we look at human studies, we have seen through brain imaging techniques that we have that are incredible these days. I go through many of them in Fundamentals of Human Neuropsychology, kind of talking about what's happening in each one and how that happens, because it's incredible what we can see through some of these imaging techniques now. But in those studies, there are similar findings, and During slow wave sleep, the metabolism is high in the hippocampus, generally speaking. If you want to scoot back up to the notes before where we were talking about slow wave sleep. An interesting exception is if you are trying to learn a reversal task, that can be as simple as learning to say some kind of alphabet backwards. I mean, just using that as a general example. To learn that, you actually do better at that after you're deprived of sleep. So maybe because, well, there's a lot of explanations I'm thinking about right now. The bottom line is maybe you are not so apt to revert back to those tasks that you've learned so well and encoded so well before. Anyway, sleep deprivation is a stressor, meaning what I'm talking about is, again, if you are deprived of sleep, how does that cause stress? Now, during slow wave sleep, the sympathetic nervous system shuts down or quiets way down, turns off. And the parasympathetic, get back to my cabin system, kicks in. Glucocorticoid, our cortisol levels should decrease. And something called CIF, or delta inducing factor, is thought to be released. I want to look at some very recent studies and see if that has continued to be documented, but that is something that has been suggested in previous research. So what's happening during REM sleep? Well, glucocorticoid secretion and sympathetic nervous system activation increase, but only temporarily, short bursts. Overall, sleep is supposed to be a time when the sympathetic nervous system is kind of shut off. And about an hour before you waken, CRH, remember CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, thus ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone from the anterior pituitary, and then ultimately glucocorticoids all rise. This is actually called a cortisol awakening response, and it is actually to kind of prepare you for changing gear, for going from metabolically things very quiescent, muscles and everything, to facing the day, if you will. So if you deprive yourself of sleep, and I'm not saying you're doing this on purpose, because there's lots of reasons that many of us don't get as much sleep as we probably should. But if you do that, the sleep-induced decline in those stress hormones up here that I talked about doesn't actually occur. So what does that mean? It not only means that they don't go down like they should, but they actually rise along with increases in sympathetic nervous system activity. Growth hormone and sex hormones decline. You get a result, this deprivation results in a breakdown of stored forms of energy in the brain. Now, I'm hoping that that makes sense from previous lectures. This should, I'm hoping, fall in place. Now let's take somebody who's sleep deprived, and you give them a working memory task to do. Instead of just like areas of the frontal cortex that really should be what's required, instead of them just lighting up, large areas of the cortex light up. It's like your brain is going, wow, I need help here. I'm recruiting help because I'm sleep deprived. Now, you know, this kind of situation has real implications um, for those who have different types of jobs and other things. Think about people who do night shifts, who work night shifts, or even worse, swing shifts, where for a couple of weeks you work from 7 to 3, then a couple of weeks from 1 till 9, and then, you know, a couple of weeks 3 to 11, whatever. Your body is constantly trying to adjust and get into this diurnal, um, you know, the cycle that's important in terms of sympathetic nervous system activation and then shutdown, and rising and falling of certain hormones, including your stress hormones, growth hormones, and sex hormones. And actually, one of the detriments of artificial lighting is the fact that um, because we have artificial lights, we can stay up all night. We can do things all night. People can work in a plant at night in different shifts. And that is positive in terms of productivity, but it also means that some of us are not getting that cycle of sleep and hormone levels going up and down that we should. There is a flight attendant study that's in your Sapolsky text. I invite you to take a look at that, but I'm not going to go through that right now. So, you know, it actually is just indicating, like, you know, the times that flight attendants have to work and how their days change, if you will. Definitely have an impact. Those differences have an impact. Okay, let's go the other way. Stress as a disruptor of sleep. This makes sense. If a lion is coming, don't take a nap. That's what our body is telling us. Our brain is telling us, oh my gosh, a bear, a lion, a saber-toothed tiger, I don't know, a woolly mammoth is coming. Now's not the time to lay down and take a nap. Be alert, be vigilant, be awake. Now, remember, CRH that's released during stress from your hypothalamus, it is in and of itself a neurotransmitter that activates all sorts of fear, anxiety, and arousal pathways in the brain. If you infuse CRH into a rat brain, certain areas, you can actually suppress sleep. So CRH, and this is kind of important, has a direct effect of its own, but we already know from previous lectures that it also activates the sympathetic nervous system. So now we have a couple of different things going on. We have the direct effects of CRH, and then we have the effects of CRH on the sympathetic nervous system, which then starts its own cascade of events. Poor sleepers tend to have higher levels of sympathetic nervous system arousal and or glucocorticoids. Again, you know, when I'm going through this, I'm thinking, well, this is kind of like in a duh moment, but it's important and hopefully intuitive. And so CRH also, I have one of my cats is down here deciding he wants to be part of the lecture. This is Samson, one of my rescues during the quarantine time. Anyway, sorry. CRH not only will suppress sleep, but actually compromises the quality of sleep that you do get. So CRH infusion into the rat brain actually affected slow wave sleep more than other stages. And slow wave sleep is what you really need for energy restoration. And this results in fragmented sleep. And I will bet you that there are many of us who would see this kind of fragmented sleep in our own situations. Another thing that can happen with this CRH infusion or your own endogenous release of CRH is that even when you do get slow wave sleep, you don't get the normal benefits from it that you would otherwise get. Again, here comes another one of those double whammy situations. Less of a delta wave pattern is demonstrated when someone is stressed. Also, if you infuse glucocorticoids, you can actually impair the memory consolidation that should occur during slow wave sleep. So, sleep deprivation can cause stress, which then causes sleep deprivation, which then causes stress, which, Now, Sapolsky says, however, don't panic. And I'm going to take this out right now because I believe I saw it and I don't want to forget. Don't panic, Sapolsky says. Why not? Because sleep deprivation doesn't cause a massive stress response. And although that may be true, I'm just thinking that night after night after night, you get enough of it, it's going to accumulate. But the need to sleep will eventually overcome the stressors. But here is a very interesting point, and I am sure that many of you can relate. The expectation that you're going to sleep poorly makes you stressed enough to get poor quality sleep. Talk about A causes B causes A causes B. There you go. And I mean, I just going back and thinking about the night before maybe a major exam in a class, way back when. Excuse me. I would go, you know, you do your studying, whatever, and you go, okay, I need a good night's rest, right? And you lay there and you're like, oh gosh, I got this exam. Can't. Okay, you look at the alarm or your watch. You go, oh, that's okay. 5 hours sleep is going to be good. I've really got to get rest or I'm not going to do well. I'm not going to do well on this exam if I don't get more sleep. Let me see. Oh, 4 hours. I'll be fine as long as I sleep 4 hours. Well, you know the deal. I remember going to sleep about just in time to have to get up and wishing I hadn't slept at all. So I'm just recounting that to show you that many of us have experienced that exact same thing and what is happening when that occurs. So last thing I have here is anticipatory stress is something that we are going to see interwoven in pretty much everything we're looking at. Unpredictable fragmentation of sleep is very technical, yucky. All right. So this was, I tried very hard to make it a very accessible and not too lengthy of a lecture because I know some of the material you've been doing is quite lengthy and a little bit deep, but I believe that we have covered the most important points, and hopefully between these notes and the images of the EEGs that you have an idea of what's going on and why different stages of sleep are so important. And wrapping that up, I'm just hoping that as you go through the semester and experience the stress that obviously it's hard not to experience, that you have a way to not let it completely destroy your sleep. We need the sleep, and to find ways to get high quality sleep is important. So having said that, good luck with that, and talk again soon on another